Let's get going. We are on the top. We didn't. Yesterday's daf was such a tough daf, so we only got to Amid Bays of 72B1. 72B1 in the art school. We're in the right column. The right column on 72B1 at the two dots, in other words. Okay, so we're continuing on, and again we're going to do a somewhat repeating of yesterday's Gemara a little bit, and that's okay because it'll flow together. Here we go. Okay. Shar kol hazvachim sheshachtim l'shum Pesach. All other sacrifices mean, let's call it again a shlomim, that you on the Shabbos, which you then changed the name essentially, and you were bringing it as the Pesach. So we're talking about Erev Pesach, that is a Shabbos. You have a behema that you put aside to be a shlomim, which means that you were not allowed to bring it on Shabbos. And you said, but you went ahead and you changed its name, its purpose, to bring it to cover your Pesach, So you were trying to be Mekayim, the mitzvah of the day. The day was covered Pesach, but you bringing it with a shlomim that you now are switching its name. So the Mishnah said, Im eina royin chayiv. So now, if this animal, this shlomim that you're now changing its purpose to a Pesach, was not royin, meaning it was a female or it was 2 years old, so therefore you're chayiv, because you should have known that this doesn't work. The im royin, but if it was worthy, meaning it's a zachar, it's a male, and it's less than a year old, so it fits the criteria of an animal that could be used for a carbon Pesach. Now there's room already for a mistake. Here we have an argument. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatas. Rabbi Eliezer says, I don't care. The fact that you were trying to cover the mitzvah, you were toeh b'dvar mitzvah, you made a mistake in trying to fulfill the mitzvah of the day of carbon Pesach. It doesn't matter to me whether you made a mistake in halacha, you made a mistake in mitzvah, you made a mistake, you got to bring a chatas. Rabbi Yeshua says you're pater, because the bottom line is there's room here for making a legitimate mistake. Yes, it was started off as a shlomim, but the day's carbon was a carbon Pesach, and this animal is a male less than a year old. There's room to make a mistake. You were toeh b'dvar mitzvah, you made a mistake in trying to do the mitzvah. We're not going to be mechayev you a carbon chatas, a sin offering. So now, the Gemara then goes and breaks it. Okay, man tana deshani lei bein ruin l'shenim. Who's the tana that essentially is the author of this part of the Mishnah to differentiate between animals that are suitable for a Pesach and animals that are not suitable for a Pesach? Reb Shimon. It's Reb Shimon. The Tanya. I'm sorry, everything. The Tanya. Echad hazabachim aroyim. The echad hazabachim shein aroyim. Whether one slaughters on the Shabbos, an Erev Pesach, that's a Shabbos, he slaughters. He slaughters an animal for the sake of the Pesach, whether the animal was worthy, meaning it was a male less than a year old, or it's not worthy, it's a female more than a year old, right? V'chein, and also ashoich d'shem amurei tzibur, or he slaughtered for the amurei tzibur, the communal offerings, meaning on Shabbos we bring 2 tamids, the tamid shel boiker, the tamid in the morning and the tamid in the afternoon, and in the middle we bring the musafim, the extra, the moisif, the 2 extra offerings, so that there's only 4 offerings that we bring on the Shabbos. So now he brings another animal, either before we brought those animals on Shabbos or even after. It's mashma from over here. He brings it potter. He's potter. Divrei Rabbi Meir. This is Rabbi Meir, Charlie's favorite Tana, because he's completely lenient. He says, bottom line is, if in your head you're meant to fulfill a mitzvah, you were toeh b'dvar mitzvah, even if it's very far-fetched, you should have figured out that this is completely wrong. We're letting you off the hook. You don't have to bring a carbon, you don't have to bring a single. Comes Rab Shimon. Amar Rabbi Shimon, where it says Rabbi Shimon, Loi nechleku Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua do not argue.
Give me Yitzchak. Where are you? Where are you?
Oh, I'm on 72B1. I'm about to switch over to 72B2.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm on the bottom. Amar Rabbi Shimon, Loi nechleku Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yeshua al she'ena royin shechayit. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua do not argue that where the animal is a female or more than a year old, that you chayiv. You mean to bring it for a carbon Pesach. You meant your intentions were all good. You were toyer b'dvar mitzvah. You made a mistake only in the mitzvah. You should have known better. Everybody knows that a carbon Pesach, that a Pesach sacrifice comes from a male animal that's less than a year old. You shouldn't have blown that. We're now on 72B2. 72B2.
Got it.
Okay, so now we're all in the same place. Alma nechleku. So where does Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua argue? Al haroyin, where it is suitable. Meaning, it was started life as a shlomim, but today is Erev Pesach, happens to be Shabbos, right? It happens to be Shabbos, it's Erev Pesach, everybody's bringing the Pesach, so you say, oh, okay, I'm going to bring this as my Pesach. And it's a male, and it's less than a year old, so it fits everything. It only has one minor problem. It started life as a shlomim, right? And you thought you could get away with this, right? So on this, Rabbi Eliezer Mechayev Chatas, Rabbi Eliezer is Mechayev Chatas. He says, I'm so sorry. The bottom line is you made a mistake. That's it. Mechayev Chatas. Rabbi Yeshua Paita. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, since there's so much room over here to make a mistake, whereas Jeffrey and I discussed 2 days ago, there's millions of carbon Pesachs being brought on Erev Pesach. This is what it is. It's logical that your animal matches everybody else's animal. It's young, it's less than a year old, it's a male, it's a sheep or a goat, and what it called? There's room to err. In such a case, it's room to err. We're letting you, Rabbi Yeshua says you're off the hook, you don't have to bring the chatas. So now, the Gemara is going to go and explain Rameir's position. Rameir is the most lenient, and he says, even if there's just a small, even if you should have figured it out on your own, that this was a problem here, I'm letting you off the hook. Amar Rabbi, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rameir potted, what it called, exempted to bring a carbon chatas, to bring the sin offering. Afilu egel shazivche shalom shechach to the shulpesach. Even a calf of a shalomim that you're now bringing instead for a Pesach. A Pesach could only be brought from a sheep or a goat. It can't be brought from an animal, from a calf. So this is clearly a major mistake. Your animal does not match up to everybody else's animals. You should have noticed that everybody else is driving a Cadillac and you're driving a Honda. But you didn't. You didn't. Says Rabbi Meir, your heart was in the right spot, right? You're off the hook. So says the Gemara, nah, this is a little hard. This is very far-fetched. Amalei Rab Zera l'Rabibi, v'hamar Rabbi Yochanan said, Moida hayu Rab Meir b'balei mumin. Rab Meir conceded that where there's a Baal Mum, where the animal has a blemish, and it's obvious the blemish, it's on the outside of the animal, which means you should have noticed the blemish, that even Rameir says in such a case you got to bring a chatos if you go ahead and bring it for a Pesach on Shabbos, right? He says because that one you should have known. So you see where there's an obvious problem. Rameir does hold that you do get you are mechayev chatos. So how come over here he says if you're bringing an ego, meaning a calf, which is clearly not roy for the Pesach, he says you're off the hook. So what's going on? Amalei, Baalei Mumin loy Toribu. A Baalei Mum, he's not torrid in it. Meaning, he knows it never was good. It never had a moment that it was good. It never even made it to a shlomim. Think about it, guys. It has a mum, it has a blemish. Even as a shlomim, it can't be brought. So therefore, this is what he's doing. He's taking an animal that wasn't even good to be a shlomim, And now he's taking it in insult over injury, and he's taking this Baal Mum and says, I'm going to use it for my Pesach. That already is no good. You took an animal that was already set aside because it was a Baal Mum. But in the case of a shlomim calf, he was preoccupied. A shlomim calf is a good shlomim. It could be brought as a shlomim. It only cannot be brought as a Pesach, because a Pesach comes from a sheep and a goat. But since he was involved in this animal as a good kosher potential sacrifice, so now there's room, says Rameh, for him to make a mistake and apply it to a different sacrifice. Masha'enke, by a Baal Mum, by a blemish, it was never standing to be a good sacrifice. It never had a shas hakosher. That's the language in the shas. A shas hakosher never had a moment that it was kosher to be an offering. It was a Baal Mum, it was a blemish. So in such a case, you have no excuses. But where you have a shlomim that's a calf, which is a good shlomim, you really could bring it for a shlomim, you just can't bring it for Karban Pesach. So therefore, it's a good animal. It's an animal that's worthy to be brought up as a offering. I'm not allowed to bring it as a Pesach, but there's room to make an error. Says Rameh, room to make an error. I'm letting you off the hook. Rabbi asked Rav Nachman, Chulin mishum Pesach. Chulin. Now here's the rule. An animal, in order to be offered in the Beis Hamikdash, has to be mekudesh, has to be concentrated. It has to be made holy by you. You have to say, this animal is holy. Chulin ba'azara is also. To bring chulin, non-sacred animals, into the Beis Hamikdash to be offered as an offering is completely also. It's chayav karos exactly. Okay, so here's a guy who made a mistake. He said, oops, it's Erev Pesach. So he runs to his garage, opens up his garage, and pulls out a calf, and pulls out a sheep, and he grabs the sheep, and he brings it for a Pesach. So he slaughters the chulin, which he forgot to make holy, for a Pesach. Mali Amar Rameya. In such a case, what would Rameya, the great lenient Rameya, what would he say? Amalei, Rav Nachman answered, Poiter hoyer Rameya filu chulin l'shum Pesach. Rameya would pater him from bringing a chatos, a sin offering, even if he brings chulin for a Pesach, which is completely no good. Remember, chulin never has a moment that it's allowed to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash. Chulin by itself is also in the Beis Hamikdash. So now we have the question. So for the Gemara, Ramaya said that when it's an obvious problem, where you have an obvious blemish, so that it never has a moment that it's good to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash, the Ramaya is minded that in such a case, if you did bring it, you would have to bring a sin offering, a chatas. So why not in this case, where he brought chulin, which never had a moment a shas hakosher, would never had a moment that it was allowed to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash? Why does he allow it? So he answers, you're not going to get confused. The mum is there. You see it. It's got a huge slash on the side of its body. It's got an eye, as we're going to see, that's filled with cataracts. Okay? So, in such a case, the mum, the blemish is obvious. There's a dent in the car. There's a dent in the animal. You see it. You shouldn't get confused. Hani mechlape. Chulin, you could get confused. Very simple. As Jerry and I discussed the other day, there were millions and millions of animals floating around on Erev Pesach. The chulin animal, how do you know when you look at the animal whether it's chulin or it's kodesh, whether it's non-sacred or has become sacred? You don't know that. There's no way to tell that one animal looks like the next animal, right? This is a great lesson in life. The Gemara talks about people. The people that are on top of this world are on bottom in the next world, and vice versa. Meaning that it's hard to tell what's the real story with a person, because every person looks the same. Here we got the same issue over here. Hani mechlape, over here by chulin, you can get confused. You can get confused, says Rameh, you're off the hook. Says the Gemara, so you're telling me that the reason of Rameh is because You might get confused, you might not get confused, and that's where he makes the determination of whether you have to bring a chatos or not. Rabbi Elazar says, if in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Ramei exempted, afilu egel shall zivche shalom shechaftu l'shem Pesach, even a calf of shalom that he made a mistake and he bought it for a Pesach. But what do you see? An egel is obvious. It's not a sheep. It's not a goat. It's clearly not something that could be brought for a Pesach. And Alma, what do you see? The Talmud Ramei Mishum Torid. And we explained over there that Ramei's reason is because he was occupied. In other words, a Baal Mu'um never has a moment that it's good to become a carbon, to become an offering. So he's never occupied in it, so he has no excuse to now make it into a Pesach. It never was good. Masha Enkein, an egel for a shlomim, a calf for a shlomim, is a good shlomim. If he wanted to, he could bring it for a shlomim. He just can't bring it on Shabbos, but it's a good carbon. So now that it's already a good carbon, the fact that he made a mistake and turns it into a Pesach, there's room for the mistake. But it's not because of confusion. So after the Gemara, Amalei, this is what we're saying. We're saying this, Rameya is a hybrid. Torid, Alpha Abdullah Mechalei, preoccupation, meaning if you have an animal that's really good to be an offering, just not good to be this offering, there's confusion. That's even, there's room to what do you call it, that's even if he's being torrid. Since it's good to be, go ahead, not confusion, I'm sorry. Even if it's an animal that's worthy to be an offering, like a calf is worthy to be an offering for a shlomim, even though there's no confusion because it's a calf and not a sheep or a goat, it doesn't matter, that's you're off the hook. And the other way, mechalef apagadoloi torid. Same thing on the other side, if you've got the room to get confused, or even though you're not preoccupied, it's the same thing over there. That's the case of where you bring chulin, where you bring a chulin, since a chulin animal, you can't tell the difference between a chulin animal and a holy animal, a mekudishtik animal. There's room to be confused, even though the chulin animal never had a moment itself that it was mutter to become a carbon. It never had a moment that it was worthy to become a carbon. La fuke balmum. But either way, we exclude we exclude that Rameya goes ahead and exempts from a chatas or a sin offering. We exclude Bali Mum, which is not confusable because clearly it has a dent, it has an injury, it's clearly no good, so there's no reason why you should be confused. And number two, because it has this dent, this thing, it was never an offering. So you have no excuses. And says, hey, if you got no excuses, I'm sorry, I can't let you off the hook. I know Charlie wants me to be completely lenient, but I gotta have some limits in my lenience, in being lenient. Okay, we're on 72b3. Okay, since we're on the discussion of Toya B'Dvar Mitzvah, since we've been discussing over here making a mistake in the doing of a mitzvah, which means your heart was in the right place, you just messed up, the Gemara is going to bring some other cases. Yosef Rab Zeir Rab Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Ikla Debei Shmuel Bar Yitzchak. Rab Zeir Rab Shmuel Bar Yitzchak was sitting on Rab Shmuel Bar Yitzchak's porch. So in other words, sitting in Rab Shmuel Bar Yitzchak's. So they were like Jerry over there sitting on the porch in the freezing cold of New Jersey. We also would call Amri. And they said, Rab Shimon ben Lakish, Nech Nischalef Loi Shaput Shel Noiser, Bishaput Shel Tzeli. If one confused, as you know, Noiser meat left over, is not allowed to be eaten, but needs to be burnt. So that means leftover meat that extended its time, it needs to be burnt. But if one confused the spit of noiser meat with the spit of roasted carbon meat, roasted carbon meat is allowed to be eaten, either by the kohen or if it's a shlomim, by the owners of the shlomim. So let's say, but noiser is not allowed.
It's a Pesach.
No, this is not a Pesach. This case is not a Pesach. That's why I'm being very careful.
Yeah.
This is universal. This is a universal. No, this is universal, Daddy. The Gemara wants to bring other cases of Torah b'dvar mitzvah, not just with regard to the Pesach. It's not just the other than the Pesach. That's why you're right. You could say it's the Pesach, but I'm trying to be more broader because the Gemara is trying to be more broader here. So, if one goes ahead and confuses a spit of noise meat with roasted meat that you're allowed to eat, when he eats the noise, it's a terrible aveira. Because if one eats noise, he's chayiv kares, he's chayiv b'karo, chayiv. He has to bring a carbon. Now here's the problem. Eating up a carbon is a mitzvah. Part of every carbon is that the carbon should be slaughtered and eaten up. Every carbon has this mitzvah, that the carbon needs to be eaten up. It's a little different than Pesach, which we'll talk about it another time, but it has to be eaten up. So he's eating it. So he's Torah b'devar mitzvah. We still say universally over here, chayiv, says Reish Lakish, that he is chayiv, he has to bring a chatas. And on this, the Rabbi Yochanan came and he added, Ishtoi nida boal, if somebody has relations with his wife while she's the nida, by the way, relations is called tashmish hamita, arranging the bed. So that's the lashon we're going to use. In Shas, we use the word tashmish hamita. Ishtoi nida boal, if somebody is boal, has tashmish with his wife while she's a nidol, chayiv, he's chayiv. But yevimta nidol baal. But if one goes ahead and he has tashmish in order to inaugurate a relationship of yibum with this woman, is potter. What is yibum? Just to remind everybody what yibum is. And this goes back to really before the Torah was given, even because Yehuda asked his sons to do this. If somebody is married and passes away without children, the halacha is that the brother of the dead person should take the wife of the dead person and essentially do yibum with her, marry her, in order to chokim shem achiv, in order to rise up the name of his brother. Today we do not do this because the halacha is you can only do yibum only if you do it l'shem shemayim, for the sake of heaven, l'shem mitzvah, with no other thoughts in mind. Today we take it for granted that everybody's got other thoughts in mind, and therefore today everybody does chalitza. That's the thing where you go in front of Bezdin, you take off the shoe, he takes off his shoes, you spit in the shoe, and you do the whole business. So here's a case where if somebody is boil his wife while she's in nida, he needs to bring a chatas. If someone boils a yavama, if somebody has relations with his new yavama, he's potter. Now here's the problem. In both cases, you're doing a mitzvah. In one case, you're inaugurating the mitzvah of yibum. In the other case, you're trying to have children, perivia. Or you're trying to pleasure your wife, which we're going to talk about in a second. Okay? But either way, either case is doing a mitzvah. Well, if that's the case, why in one case are you chayiv, in one case are you potter? Says the Gemara, Ikadi Amri. This is the way you need to. What is Rabbi Yochanan coming to tell us? Adding on to Reish Lakish. Ikadi Amri, Kol Shekein B'Shehi Mechayiv. In the case where one eats noiser, in the place of regular sacrificial meat, regular carbon meat, it's there Rabbi Yochanan says he's liable to loy asa mitzvah. Because at the end of the day, he didn't do a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? To eat up a carbon. Nicer, the mitzvah is not to eat it. So clearly you didn't do any kind of mitzvah whatsoever. So this is as far as you can get in Torah Devar mitzvah. That's what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. Which means that Rabbi Yochanan is saying that even if one intended to do a mitzvah, but at the end of the day, no mitzvah happened, you're liable. That's the reason why Rabbi Yochanan then says that if somebody has tashmish, has relationship with his wife while she's a nida, right, there's no mitzvah, because while she's a nida, all the other mitzvahs that are associated with your wife don't apply, okay? Which of course does not explain about Yibum yet. So, now we're on 72b4. Others say, Isti Amri, Vahi Potter, that in fact, the case of one where one ate the wrong meat, he ate the nicer meat, as opposed to the good carbon meat, the good sacrificial meat, actually Rabbi Yochanan is coming to exempt him from a carbon chatas, from a sin offering. My Tama, what's the reason? Because in the case of his wife, where he's boiled his wife, he should have asked her, by the way, where are you standing? Are you a nida or not? Talk to your wife. Okay? Find out. But in the case of the meat that's turning on the spit, there was nobody around to ask. There was nobody around to ask. He made the simple assumption, why would they have a nicer over here? It's probably good sacrificial meat. So there's room. Okay, so the Rabbi Yochanan, so now the Gemara has all the questions. So that's the basic question. Why does Rabbi Yochanan say if somebody is boil is yava, while she's a nida, he's potter from being a sin offering a chatas? Why the ka'avin mitzvah? Because he's doing a mitzvah. In other words, even though he wasn't supposed to have relations with her because she's a nida. At the end of the day, he was boiled with her and made her his yavama. So he did a mitzvah. Ish dynamic of a mitzvah. By his wife, he also did a mitzvah. The mitzvah of what? Procreation. The first mitzvah in the Torah, Piruribya, which, by the way, according to the Hamakna, the Rabbi Pinchas Horowitz, what do you call the Rebbe of the Chassam Sofer, the whole marriage itself is only a hechsher mitzvah to the mitzvah of Piruribya. It's only, you need marriage to do Piruribya correctly. That's it, the procreation correctly, Minat Torah. So it says, and for the Gemara, the Ishtenu Beres. You're actually talking about where his wife was pregnant. Since she's pregnant, and she can know, obviously, therefore there's now, at this moment in time, no mitzvah to procreate, because you can't procreate with a pregnant woman, right? And it happens to be that she showed blood, even though she was pregnant, so she had a din of a nida, right? You therefore have no mitzvah when you're doing. That's why Rabbi Yochanan says you're chayiv to bring a sin offering. But there's the mitzvah of Oina, which is that you have to pleasure your wife. And for the Gemara, shaloi b'shas Oinasa, it was not the time of Oina, which was good. We're going to see, because she's a nida. When she's a nida, there's no mitzvah of pleasuring her. Says the Gemara, but the Gemara doesn't yet have this answer. Va'amar Rava says, chayiv adam l'samech ishta b'dvar mitzvah. A person is mechayiv to be misamech his way in the dvar mitzvah, even to go beyond the regular way. So maybe he was having in mind to be misameach his wife, to bring his wife joy, and so he was being Isaac the mitzvah.
She wants
Gemara, Samoch Levesta, that it was close to her period. Since it's close to a period, the rule is either 12 hours or 24 hours prior to the period, you're not allowed to have relations with her. Minat Torah. We today do automatically the 30th to 31st, the Yom HaChodesh and all the other stuff. That was the thing. I want to make a point here, by the way. This Gemara is astonishing, because the Gemara takes it for granted that women have pleasure. That women have pleasure. Science did not come to this until the 1800s. Throughout the Middle Ages, through the Renaissance, it was given to understand that men have pleasure and women in reality do not. The Gemara knew and took it as for granted and said it is built in as a mitzvah to pleasure your wife. And in fact, it is one of your ksuba responsibilities. It's one of your contractual responsibilities. The Gemara was 2,000 years ahead of the rest of the world, as is always the case when it came to human relations. Chazal, the human condition, Chazal focused on it like a laser, understood that we are the reason for the entire creation. Okay, we are the purpose of the entire creation, and therefore looked at it and understood that of course it had to be this way. It took science almost 2,000 years to catch up with us. Something to point out. If the whole problem over here is that it was near her period, which means within 12 hours or 24 hours, Minat Torah, you weren't allowed to be with her, then that's the case. I feel to be Yevim Toinami. Then in the case of Yevama, it's the same thing. You got the same situation. We're on 72b5. Says the Gemara, and this is again basic humanity. Yevama, this is the first night he's with her. He's bashful. He doesn't want to ask her. You can imagine it's his wife, it's his brother's former wife. It's very uncomfortable, the whole thing. His wife is not embarrassed. Let him ask his wife, is she a nida or not? Rabbi Yochanan, so now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan came out. To whom does Rabbi Yochanan state his rule regarding Yevama? If he's saying he's learning it up like Rabbi Yossi, that doesn't work out. It's not because we learned Rabbi Yossi, the first day of Sukkot, that happened to fall out on Shabbos, and he forgot that it's Shabbos. And he took out his lulav to the public domain, and he carried it 4 amos in the public domain. Potter, he's potter. Because in fact, he took it out with rishus. Hang on 1 second, please. Hello? Yes, thank you very much. Please let them in. Thank you. Okay, sorry, that was a Boca Gate. Anyway, so, and this is the reason why. At the time when the base of Mikdash was standing, the Yidden did bring lulav and esrog on Shabbos. They did pick up lulav and esrog on Shabbos. They weren't allowed to carry it in the streets, so they would bring it there before Shabbos. They would put all their lulavs and esrogs in the base of Mikdash, or in their shuls actually, and in their shuls on Erev Shabbos, and then they would be mafkarit. In other words, they would say that we're allowing it because the next morning everybody just picked up a lulav and a esrog, not your lulav and your esrog, but a esrog and a what do you call it? So in other words, but the point was that he was allowed to take the lulav and esrog, but the fact is he forgot. So he banged his lulav. He was afraid that it was puzzle, or he looked at his esrog and he saw a dot, and he decided to bring it to Rabbi Gibber. He decided to bring it to Rabbi Gibber to check it out, and he forgot it Shabbos. So he took it out of the shul, right? He's davening in the early minyan. Rabbi Gibber was davening in the later minyan. So he runs out of the early minyan, and he runs across the estancia to find out if it's kosher. And in doing so, he carries the dalet amos per shul. So Rabbi said he's potter because he was preoccupied with the mitzvah. He's off the hook from bringing a chatas. Says the Gemara, Dilma Shani Hasa, maybe over there. It's different than Zman Bohol, because the Zman is Bohol, because you only have 1 day to bring the lulav and esrog. In the times of the Beis Hamikdash, only in the Beis Hamikdash did you bring lulav and esrog every day. The rest of Eretz Yisrael, the rest of Chutz La'aretz, you only brought it the first day. That was it. Lulav and esrog was a 1-day affair, was not a 7-day affair. Things have changed over time. That's right.
No,
so
we do it L'Zechem Mikdash. That's what we do every 7 days.
Correct. That's what we're doing. Much of what we do today, by the way, and almost everything that we do without us realizing it, is Zeichel Mikdash. Even on Pesach, right? Zeichel Mikdash Kehilel. Everything is really being done so that when Mashiach comes, it won't be completely foreign to us. So, the point of it is that since it has an appointed time, but Yibum does not have an appointed time. We said you have to do it tonight. Push it off and do it tomorrow. right? Which is not a nidor. So therefore, maybe over there you would have to bring a carbon. So Elamai, the fact that Rabbi Yochanan says you're potter for bringing a carbon even by Yibum, it can't be for this reason of Rabbi Yossi and Lulav and Esrog. The Elo, you want to say it's Rabbi Yeshua the Zavachim. Rabbi Yeshua, who said that if you bring a zevach, a shlomim, and you bring it for the sake of a Pesach, you're exempt from bringing a chatas as long as it's a male and under a year old. That's not good. The Hasamnami Zamani Bohol over there too. The only time you can bring your carbon Pesach is the afternoon of the 14th. So there you're going crazy. You're running around with the carbon, right? Yibum you don't have to do today. You could do it tomorrow. So it says the Gemara, Rabbi Yeshua the Tinoikis. Maybe it's the case of Rabbi Yeshua and the babies when they got mixed up between the babies of Friday and Shabbos, which needed circumcision, which needed the bris milah. But straight the Gemara Samnami Zamani Bol over there. It's also the Zman. The 8th day is the 8th day. You're supposed to do it on the 8th day, no other day. So says the Gemara. We're on 72b6. Finally, getting to the end of the daf of yesterday. The Elika Rabbi Yeshua the Truma. Maybe it's Rabbi Yeshua with regard to Truma. The Tanan, because we learned if a kohen was eating Truma. And after he was eating the truma, while he was eating, he found out that he's in fact the son of a divorcee or the son of a chalutza, which means either way that he's not allowed to go and eat. He's not allowed to go ahead and eat. He's not allowed to go ahead and eat from the truma. He's not allowed to go another. Well,
he's not a kohen.
No, not so simple. He is a kohen. He's just doesn't have any of the rights of a kohen. But it's not like he's completely off the grid. He has to fit in somewhere. He has to have some shades.
He doesn't get an aliyah like a kohen.
He doesn't get an aliyah either. Right. He doesn't get an aliyah either. Right. But the reason why he doesn't get that is that already is a gezeirah. What do you call that he doesn't get an aliyah? But just what he called. Rabbi Eliezer mechayiv keren v'chaimish. Rabbi Eliezer says he got to pay back the principal of the truma that he ate and a penalty of a fifth. Rabbi Yeshua says he doesn't have to pay back the fifth. He does have to pay back the principal, but he doesn't get punished by paying an extra 20%. Why? Because he erred Torah with the bar mitzvah. He made a mistake while he was trying to eat truma, which is a mitzvah. This can't be the reason. Dilma did the Rabbi Barabaya, Truma be'erev Pesach. We're dealing the Mishnah over there is dealing with Truma of Chometz on Erev Pesach. The Zamani bowl, where the Zaman is pushing you because you only got until midday to burn the Chometz. So again, it's not a good comparison to Yevama where you got more time. Inami, you can't say this is Rabbi Yochanan's source about the Yevama that is Potter. Because he's Torah b'mitzvah, shani truma de ikri avoda. The truma is called an avoda, a service of the Beis Hamikdash. The avoda, the rachmana achshem. And with God to avoda, the Torah Kedosha, the merciful one, goes ahead. It says even if a chalal goes ahead and does the avoda, it's okay. It's not a disaster. If a kohen was going ahead and he was being makriv and he was slaughtering, he was offering up sacrifices. And then he finds out he's the son of a divorcee or a chalutza, somebody who did chalitza, right? Or called kabbanis kulan shehikim agavim mizbeach pesulin. Says the Tanakama, all the sacrifices that he brought up on the altar are no good. Rabbi Yeshua machshir. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, they are good. Now that he found out, it's anything he does after that is no good. But while he did not know that he wasn't allowed to, he didn't know that he was a flawed kohen, they're good. My time of the Rabbi Yeshua, what's the time of Rabbi Yeshua? Diksiv, Beirach Hashem Cheloi, Upayel Yodav Tirtzeh. Which means, bless his belongings, Cheloi, his Chelek, Hashem, and the deeds of his hands, except. This is referring to Kahanim who are disqualified, and if they inadvertently do the Avodah, it is accepted. I'm so sorry, I got to take the phone again. I got somebody at the thing. Hello? Yes, thank you. Please let them in. Okay, so, in other words, it says Rabbi Yehuda, by the Rabbi Yeshua, by the way, Daddy, this is the proof that they're still Kahanim. Because if they weren't Kahanim, even though they didn't know, even if it was inadvertently, Rabbi Yeshua would not be able to say they did the Avodah, because they would say it was a non-Kohen who did the Avodah, even inadvertently is no good. Since in the essence he is a Kohen, he's a disqualified Kohen, but he is a Kohen. The pasuk comes along and we play with the words. Beirach Hashem Cheloi, bless Hashem their portion. Cheloi could also be read as a chalutza, a cholo, a disqualified. Bless Hashem the disqualified. Upal yodatit, and the work of their hands except.
Is good.
So therefore there is an issue. So you see from over here that a fellow who does the avodah is valid. Therefore, since the eating up of truma is an avodah, and it was done inadvertently because he didn't know at that time that it was avodah, therefore it's good. That gives us no explanation regarding the yavama, why he's allowed to go, why is he potter by yavama? So, afraid the Gemara of truma heichi ikri avodah. Where do we see that truma is called an avodah? It's not because we learned Ma'aseh of Reb Tarfon. There was a story with Reb Tarfon. Reb Tarfon was a kohen. Reb Tarfon was a kohen. Shaloi ba emesh lebeis medrash. Yesterday, the evening, he didn't come to shul. The shakris mitzvah Rabbi Gamliel. In the morning, Rabbi Gamliel found him. Why didn't you come to shul last night? So you see, everybody, it's perfectly legitimate to ask other people, why weren't you in shul yesterday? Okay, you see over here. In fact, it's not, what do you call it? It's not uncouth. Amalai, avoided about it. I was performing an avodah and I couldn't come. Amalai, so Gamliel said, what are you talking about? All your words are just words of mystery. There's no base of English today. What kind of avodah were you doing? Amalai, so Rav Tarfon said, because it says, and we're now on the dot, Ayin Gimel Amid Aleph, 73A1, the pasuk says, "Avodas matono she'etenes kunaschem va'azah karev humos." The avodah of the gifts that I have given your kahanim, and any non-kohen who approaches shall die. And if you look at the top Rashi, avodas matono, he goes over there, matnois kuhuna, the presence of the kuhuna, shenasati lochem, that I gave to them. Harei heim ka'avodah, are just like a service to me. I gave them a present. I told them that they're allowed to eat the chayzik v'shaik, the thigh and all that, and I give them the truma, even though I'm giving it to them. Their eating is their service to me. Right? Zog to Gemara. Asu achila truma kigivulin. We see that the scripture considers the eating of truma outside of the Beis Hamikdash, in everybody in their houses. Ka'avodas Beis Hamikdash, like the Beis Hamikdash. So Rav Tarfon, who was busy eating up teruma, was busy eating up teruma, therefore he couldn't come to shul the previous night. Good. Says the Mishnah Baita.
I would have said, go and eat it. Go eat it in the Beis Medrash.
Okay, so the answer is, so either as Boca Jewish Center is getting involved in, the shul that they had was a Beis HaKnesses. The shul that they had might have been a Beis HaKnesses. As we know, a Beis HaKnesses can only be used for davening. You're not allowed to have a kiddush there. You're not allowed to eat there. You're not allowed to have a coffee there. Okay, you're not even allowed to learn there. Okay, so that would be the easy answer. The other answer is if you come into shul, even a Beis Medrash with a pastrami sandwich, don't be surprised if the president of the shul comes and says, I'm sorry, go outside and eat your pastrami sandwich outside. This is now, it's one thing to have a coffee in shul, it's another thing entirely to have a pastrami sandwich. And if you're going to say, oh, I'm so religious, it's a truma, he'll say, go home and eat your truma at home. Okay? That's really, of course, the answer. Says the Gemara,
I think he would say, why didn't you bring me a sandwich too for myself?
Because he'll say it's true. You can't.
Yeah, where's my pastrami sandwich?
Right, that's what he would say.
That's exactly. That's the other side. Right. So you can see where the problems would come up. Bottom line is, you can see exactly where the problems come up. Shachtu shaloi la'achla. In other words, the same problems that we have today, they had then. People don't change. That's the bottom. When Shlomo HaMelech says there's nothing new under the sun, he meant people. People don't change. Shachtu shaloi. Now, if one slaughtered the Pesach for those who could not eat it, which we explained means somebody who's sick or they're older and their teeth can't eat the meat. Right? We said in that case, you've got to bring a chatos. Pshita, says the Gemara, I didn't even need you to tell me this. Even the Hassam Pasul, we learned it in previous Mishnah on Samach Aleph, Amud Aleph, which Charlie yesterday pointed out. Right, that Mishnah, we already learned over there that a Pesach that is brought for those who cannot eat it is invalid. Hachi chayiv. So here in our Mishnah, which is talking about Shabbos, you might have had Ava Amina that, what do you call it, that you were allowed to? Of course you chayiv. If matter where it wasn't Shabbos, it's possible, then obviously on Shabbos, it's not even a Pesach at all. You're definitely chayiv. Except for the Gemara, you're right. It's simply editing. Yishum the Tana Sefer Potter. Since the Sefer is going to say that if one slaughters the Pesach for those who could eat it and for those who can't eat it, in other words, for those whose teeth don't work and those whose teeth do work, he's not liable. Tana Reisha Chayiv. Right, the Gemara Ba'al that's also obviously. Mishum the Hassam Kasher. We taught again over there in that Mishnah on 61a and Samach Aleph Amud Aleph that a Pesach slaughtered for both those who could eat and those who can't eat is valid, is a good one. Obviously, hacha potter, I might say over here, obviously a potter. If it's a good carbon, it's a good carbon. So I don't need you to repeat the halacha. Ella, says the Gemara, since the Mishnah taught the case of one who brings a Pesach, not for its own name, but brings it for a shalomim. So even though that animal, if it was remained the Pesach, was allowed to be shechted, slaughtered on Shabbos, but in the name of something else for a shalomim, it's not allowed to be slaughtered on Shabbos, right? Tananama shaloi la'achla. So pray to Gemara, Buhi, Gufa, Lamali. What did I need that for? I know that. It's obvious that one that slaughters it not for its own sake. It's only a Pesach that's doicha Shabbos, that pushes off to Shabbos. Every other animal does not. So if I change its name and it's no longer a Pesach, obviously I'm not allowed to bring it on Shabbos. I don't need the Mishnah to go ahead and waste precious ink telling me an halacha that I know on my own. Then to the Gemara, because we wanted to get to the machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, which is, if you remember, if he brought it from Shar Zavachim, other Zavachim, the Shlomim that he brought for Shem Pesach, if it's roi, right, and it's a male and it's under a year old, we have the machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer says it's still a mistake and you have to bring a chat. Rabbi Yeshua says you don't. So Mamela, since you were bringing all those things, they just kept right on going. Now we got a bunch of questions. Amalei Rav Huna bar Chanina l'Brei. Rabbi Huna bar Chanina said to his son, Ki also l'kami the Rabbi Zrika. When you go in front of Rabbi Zrika, boyim and they ask the following kasha. L'divrei ha'omer. According to the one who says, Mekalkel v'chabura potter, the one who says if you act destructively on Shabbos and you make a wound, you're potter. You don't have to bring a carbon. Here's the halacha, Rabbi said. You're only allowed to do constructive, you're chayiv on Shabbos to bring a carbon or misa to be put to death if you do it on purpose. If you do something purposeful, it has purpose. If it's simply an act of destruction. So for an example, when we open up bags of food, let's say bags of potato chips, we always say on Shabbos, open it up completely so that it cannot be reused. So therefore, it's an act of destruction, even though you're allowed to open up a bag to get to the food, but open up the bag completely so that it cannot be reused, right? So that's just a basic example. Okay, another example, and this is very interesting. If you're in the bathroom and you realize there are no tissues on Shabbos, what do? So what there is, according to many shittas, you could take from toilet paper, just don't rip it on the perforated part. Rip it on the non-perforated part, because now you're destroying. You're destroying, right? Not so bad because you're not oil. Okay? But here's the one case it's different. You're not allowed to make a wound. You're not allowed to wound yourself on Shabbos. You're not allowed to go ahead and cut yourself on Shabbos. Cutting is what? Is destructive act. So there is one man the Omer that says that if you get a wound, if you make a wound that's destructive, right? It's not to open up a boil. It's not to open up a boil. It's simply you got angry and you cut yourself. Okay? You're not oil, but you don't have to bring a carbon because it's completely destructive. So according to the one that says, if somebody acts destructive and makes for himself a wound, he's potter. So therefore, how can you say that if one slaughters a Pesach? For those who cannot eat, you're chayav to bring a carbon. Ma'atike. What improvement did he do? It didn't become a carbon Pesach. It's not a carbon Pesach, right? We learned on the previous Mishnah on 61a, on Samach Aleph, that if you shecht it only for those who can't eat, it's no good. Because the whole reason to slaughter the carbon Pesach is to be eaten. If it can't be eaten, then what is it? It's a complete waste of time. It has to be burnt. If it has to be burnt, the slaughtering was a completely destructive act. If it was a completely destructive act, you shouldn't have to go ahead and bring a carbon, right? And for the Gemara, TK, there is a TK. Im alu lo yardu, because you did an act of a good slaughter, a good shechita, if the emurim, the sacrificial parts, are brought up onto the mizbeach, it's okay. They don't have to come down. The act of the slaughtering allows it to remain up on the altar and be burnt on the altar. We're now on 73.8.2. Says the Gemara, the next question, if one slaughtered the Pesach and then found that it had a blemish, why is he liable? We said if the blemish was on the outside, the dent was on the outside, you should have noticed the dent, right? You should have noticed the wound. So why is he liable? Matikain, what did you do by slaughtering it? It was completely useless. You have to go ahead and burn it. So there's no gain. It's completely destructive. Why are you chayav a carbon? And for the Gemara, tiken bedukin sheba'ayi. It improves the animal where the blemish is a cataract in the eye. Because the halacha is like this: a bird offering which is not slaughtered, which gets done with malika, one with breaking its neck with the thumbnail. One of its benefits is that if it has cataracts in the eyes, it's not considered a blemish. Comes Rabbi Akiva and says, saints are ready on one type of carbon, on one type of offering, a bird offering. That is not considered a blemish. A cataract is not considered a blemish. That since by a bird, it's not considered a blemish, that even by an animal, if it should have cataracts and that's its blemish, if you slaughtered it correctly and then its sacrificial parts were brought up on the Mizbeach, it's okay. It could stay there. Because like we said yesterday, if I have a little opening for a mitzvah, or I have a little opening like this case, that by a bird offering, cataracts isn't a blemish, I can carry that forward to other offerings, even though they are a blemish. But if I slaughter it correctly, says Rabbi Akiva, and you bring it on top of the altar, it doesn't come down. Good. Third question. Shop, everybody understand?
It's also by behemoths. Oh.
Right, this is that. Rabbi Akiva said
behemoths also.
No, only if that's what we're saying, Daddy. That because by a bird it's not a blemish. By a behemoth it is a blemish.
It's called,
by a behemoth it is a blemish. You're not supposed to slaughter.
Right.
Right, but if you bring it up onto the Mizbeach, you're off the hook. You don't have to bring it. Right. Shachtu v'nimtza treifa b'seisa potter. If you shecht it and you find an internal blemish, a hole in the lung, which Jerry informed me this week that in fact when they do shechita, only 35% of the animals that they shecht are good. Most are found to have treifa. Is that correct, Jerry? Right, I believe that's what you told me. Is that correct?
Basically, by the time you do, there's three things. The chalav, the knife that goes through it could make it treif if the chalav comes up with a nick. The second thing is when they do the bedikas pnim, they check the lungs while it's still in the carcass of the animal, and they find a blemish by feeling the lobes of the lung. That could be the second part that they basically make it a treif. And the third one, which is where they catch most of it, is they find a minimum blemish, blow up the lung after it comes. It's called bedikas chutz. At that point, that's where basically the biggest puzzle starts to happen. But your yield is about 35% on American cattle. That's basically black Angus. When you start going to South America, some of the South America could actually push close to 45%.
Why is that?
But that's amazing. That's amazing. So that's amazing.
Right. It's the breed of the cattle. The breed of the cattle in South America versus the breed of the cattle up north. Remember, we're shechting for the byproduct that basically has to go to treif. And if treif doesn't want a certain breed of cattle, we don't shecht that cattle. 80% of the tonnage is treif.
Wow. Wow. So it goes to show it's not such a simple business, this. So this is a case. This is exactly this case that Jerry just explained to us so beautifully. Thank you. Shachtu v'nimtza treif b'seiser, inside, either by feeling inside the animal and finding it within the cavities, or outside, blowing up the lung and discovering a hole. Potter, because there was no way for you to see it, obviously it was internal. Habigoli, but if it was a treifa externally, in other words, there was a wound that clearly showed that this animal would not live for 12 months outside. Chayiv, Yechayiv. It's a treifa. By slaughtering it, it has to be burnt. And for the Gemara, tikin la'itzi midei nevela. But what it could do, by shechting it, you take it out of nevela. Nevela is an animal that dies without shechita. By shechting it, what is the problem with nevela? Nevela creates tumah. It's metame. It goes ahead and conveys contamination. A treifa does not contaminate. That's a major ticker. Go further. Maskabla Rabino. Thank you, Jerry. That was great. Thank you. Maskabla Rabino Hodetanyo Ashoichet Chatos B'Shabbos B'Chutz La'Avodah Zarah. If somebody by accident slaughters a chatos, which obviously a sin offering, which obviously has to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos, outside of the Beis Hamikdash, and he does it for an avodah zarah. This guy is really on a roll, right? Major roll. Chayim oleh shloisha chatos. He gets 3 chatos. You could just figure it, right? 1 for Shabbos, 1 for adultery, and 1 for outside of the Beis Hamikdash, right? Pray to Gemara. Why? Ma'itakanto. What's the takana? Why is he over on Shabbos? It should only be 2 chatases. This animal has to go out and be burnt. So he should only have to bring for shechting it outside of the Beis Hamikdash and shechting it for an avodah zarah. But for Shabbos, he should be off the hook. Because he takes it out of its status of an Eber min achai, a limb from a living animal. Because even a ben noyach, even a goy is mechuyib, they're not allowed to eat Eber min achai. So the fact of the matter is they're not allowed to break legs from a live crab, for an example. Which then seems to be telling us that the mitzvah of lifnei iver le'sitei michshol, in front of a blind person, you shall not put a stumbling block. That even includes the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei noyach regarding goyim. That you cannot put in front of a goy a stumbling block that he will stumble over. As you see from this Gemara, we say over here that it is a benefit, the slaughtering of this animal, in this case, because at the very least it took it out of Meir Min HaChai. Says the Mishnah, Shachtu v'noida, if one slaughtered the Pesach offering on the Shabbos, and then it became known that the owners had withdrawn from it. So in other words, at the time of the shechting, he thought everybody was still registered. And then he found out that everybody went away. We said he's exempt. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, Osham Shenita Galiya, an Osham that has been consigned to grazing. This is the case. Somebody had an Osham, and for some reason he decided he's going to bring another animal for an Osham, or passed away. Either way, the rule is, if this happens with a chatos, the chatos has to be left to die. An Osham, on the other hand, is allowed to be left to graze until it begets a blemish. Then you can sell it. You sell it, and with its money, you buy Kates HaMizbeach, dessert for the Mizbeach. In other words, Nidvei Oilus, donated Oilus from this. So that's what we're saying over here. Also, Shenitik Laria, an Osham that's consigned for grazing. B'shachta Stam, and then somebody came and slaughtered it, without any specific. He just took it and slaughtered it. Kosher Oila can become an Oila. 73A3. Okay, Alma, I'm just trying to get to Amid Beis, that's all. Alma, Kesova, Loi, Boyi, Akira. Rab therefore clearly holds that you do not need a conscious uprooting. It happens automatically. That if I took this thing, this Osham, which has now been assigned for grazing, and I'm allowed, and which ultimately we're going to sell when it gets a blemish, in order to bring donated oilers, right? If I already bring it stam, just like this, it becomes an oil automatically, which means I do not have to consciously say I'm removing it from an osham to turn it into an oil. If that's the case, even if the animal had not been consigned for grazing, it should still be valid as an oil, because ultimately that's what it's going to be. Right? The Gemara, you're right, but it's a rabbinical gezerah. Gezerah la'acha kapara. It's a gezerah that the osham that is slaughtered after the owner received atonement from a different animal, but before it was consigned to grazing, atul lifnei kapara. The truth of the matter is, until the owner gets atonement by the slaughtering of some osham, some osham has to be slaughtered. Until he does that, the leftover animal, right, is left on the side. So we're afraid that if we allow you to go ahead and use it before we actually assign it for grazing, you're going to end up making a mistake and use it before the owner gets his atonement. Right, the Gemara, where do you know that the rabbis did this? It's not. Also, Shemei Sabalav, an Osham whose owners died. Osham is Chapu Balav, or his owners received atonement from a different animal, from a replacement Osham. Yira, you take this Osham and you graze it, until it gets a blemish, and you sell it, and then its money goes towards the voluntary communal offering. Rabbi Eliezer Oimer, Yomos, it should be left to die like a chatas. Rabbi Yeshua Oimer, Yimache, you sell it, B'yobi b'dam of oilov, you should sell it and let the proceeds be brought for a personal oilov. Not a communal oilov, but a personal oilov. Says the Gemara, b'dam of im, for its proceeds, yes. Avol gufa eloi, but the animal itself is no. The oil is not offered as an oilov. Why is this so? Why once the animal can no longer serve as an osham because the owner either died or already received his atonement from another osham, it should immediately be available to be used as an oilah. Why do I have to go through this whole long rigmarole where it gets a blemish, I sell it, I take the money, I buy a new animal, and so on and so forth. Says the Gemara, the Gezerah la'acha kapara, we're now on 73A4, atu lifnei kapara. Shema Mino. From here we see that the Rabbanan, yes, made such a gezerah that even though you're right, theoretically you could, but we're afraid that a guy is going to go ahead and use this animal prior to what he called the owner getting his atonement. Let me just see for a second. Let's stop right here because I'm rushing and it's no good. We'll stop right over here right here on the bottom. Esvei Rav Chizda the Rav Huna. Shachtu b'noide sheshachtu. Okay, we'll go right over here. We'll stop right over here. Everybody have a wonderful day.